Hey guys, Sadie here. I am bringing you my second handmade watercolor review with these beautiful watercolors from Hushwing Watercolor. This package is just beautiful. You open it up and you have the card for Hushwing. There's a little sheet of handmade watercolor paper, a note with a wax seal on it, the watercolor tin, which is tied up in a hand-dyed silk ribbon. Inside, there's the paints already swatched out in two different tinting strengths. They are protected with bubble wrap and I guess shrink wrap and foil so that they don't shift around or anything like that. They come with magnets on the bottom and they're all pretty and wrapped up. It's pretty simple to get them out, and you can see they have a kind of matte finish. There's no writing on the pans, but each of the pans has these little round magnets on them. And I just wanted to give you a close-up look at that luxurious feel. It definitely feels like a present to you or somebody else. So let's get to unwrapping. The process went by pretty quickly, pretty simple. You know what pans look like. The colors are really dark. So just showing you the palette itself again with the swatches and the pans after I've used them a little bit, all wet. So, I reorganize the pan a little bit, as you know that I do, and we're starting with Cypress jarosite. This is apparently a rare pigment from Cypress. It's a yellow ochre sort of thing. And there's two sorts of yellow ochre colors in this set. There's the Cypress jarosite and the Colonial Yellow Ochre. Of the two, the Cypress jarosite is definitely the kind of greener, more subdued of the two. It's definitely semi-opaque, it lifts easily, and it has not very much dispersion. It kind of looks like it's murky. It has this, like I said, a very much of like a greenish, darker, cooler undertone. Next is the Colonial Yellow Ochre, which is actually just a really beautiful, clean yellow ochre. It goes into the water very softly. It has much more dispersion than I would expect it to have. It's also somewhere between semi-transparent and semi-opaque. And it just has this really nice, warm yellow undertone. And when you thin it down, like I said, it's just very clean, kind of like sunshine. The Colonial Raw Sienna, all of these colors seem to have a little bit of something underneath the main color. I don't know if you can see that in the swatches. It's not just like they're a straight color that maybe gets more or less intense. It's kind of like there's a color floating on top and a color floating underneath. That might sound kind of crazy, but if you see the paints in person, I think you'll know what I mean. So for example, with this raw sienna, it's got the traditional raw sienna color on top, and on the bottom, it feels like it's got this darker, deeper, cooler color floating underneath. I mean, it's definitely granulation, but it's not extremely pronounced with a darker color coming out on the bottom. Dispersion is not bad for an earth color, nothing to write home about. It goes from this deeper, darker brown to a warmer, lighter brown. And it definitely is semi-opaque. The Colonial Burnt Sienna is probably pretty different than a lot of the other burnt siennas you've tried. It's not really very orangey. It's definitely a warm red, but it's not as orangey as some other burnt siennas I have seen. I'm going to show you all the burnt siennas that I have in comparison a bit later. It is surprisingly staining for an earth color. It's definitely opaque, or at least semi-opaque. The color is a very rustic, ruddy red brown color. Actually, I think that it wouldn't be particularly off, being my skin tone in some areas, in some darker areas. I also want to mention that all of these colors, when you put them into water, the way they disperse is really soft, so I would like to paint some kind of fuzzy bunnies or something with this sometime. Colonial Red, this I assume is basically like a Venetian red color. When we're talking about opaque, this is opaque. This will obliterate any kind of lines. When you're painting with it, you can just feel the density and the thickness of this color. It's absolutely insane. When you put it into a wash, though, you can see it separate out into these browns and these pinks and these reds. This is a surprisingly staining color. Again, normally earth colors are not very staining. This is a surprisingly staining color. The dispersion is not so much, but I really like the way that the colors separate out if you can see it in the dispersion swatch and in the painting into a wash. Colonial Burnt Umber seems like it would probably be one of my favorite colors for painting any kind of brown that needs texture. It's got a bunch of different colors coming out in the granulation. It's got like some greenish browns, some deeper, cooler browns, a little bit of warmth. It's definitely a lot cooler than the other two colors that we've talked about so far. Also an opaque color, but it can definitely be thinned down into lighter colors. It's pretty good movement on the page when painted into a wash, but in the dispersion, it doesn't seem to move very much, but you can see it separating. So this is the color that I was most interested in trying, and it is still probably my favorite color in this set, and this is actually Kirsten Kuhner, who made these colors. This is also her first and favorite color, the Colonial Violet, which is a hematite color, and I don't have anything else like it on my palette. It's just gorgeous, and I just love the way that it granulates. It is a sort of purplish color in mass tone, but you can get these kinds of burgundy colors, kinds of browns. The dark that separates out is this really deep dark, almost black purple, and then there are these kind of bluish, reddish browns on top. This is definitely an opaque color, no question about that. When you put it into a wash, it can definitely get down to semi-opaque instead. Surprisingly staining, as I said with some of the other colors. This is just a gorgeous color and a really unique color. If there's nothing else, I would definitely be using this a lot. Colonial Raw Umber. Raw Umber is actually surprisingly a color that I don't see in a lot of people's palettes, but I find it really useful for a cooler brown. And this one, the way that it granulates, you can get somewhere from this deep, cool, greenish brown all the way over to slightly warmer, getting to like khaki or army fatigues. It almost looks like alligator skin. Actually, I feel like you could probably paint an alligator with this green. Or maybe even avocado skin. This has probably the least dispersion of all of the colors. It's much more lifting, semi-opaque, and also quite granulating. So the Prussian Blue, you know that I love Prussian Blue. Unfortunately, if you have been following Denise on Instagram and you've seen her light fastness tests, you might have seen that there are some issues with Prussian Blue's light fastness. I'm going to have to do my own tests as well because I just love Prussian Blue, and this Prussian Blue is probably my favorite Prussian Blue. You just dip your brush into this and it comes out this inky black darkness. It's just so gorgeous. There's so much pigment in this pan, I cannot even believe it. When I was reading historical accounts of when Prussian Blue came out, people talked about Prussian Blue the way that people talk about phthalo blue these days. They say that it gets everywhere and it's way too potent and it's way too staining, and I really couldn't understand that because I was working with Schmincke's Prussian Blue, which is a very, shall I say, reserved or accommodating version of Prussian Blue. It doesn't get in anybody's way. But when I worked with this one, I remembered what those older painters were saying about Prussian Blue. It is definitely going to bulldoze any other color out of its way. It's amazing. So very highly staining, but you can keep working to get it off of the page. The dispersion in the dispersion swatch, once again, is not very much, but look, it took up the entire wash swatch. It can get totally opaque, but I would actually say that this is a transparent to semi-transparent pigment. It's just so packed with pigment that you can't see anything. And then we have the Cypress Green Earth, which may look quite light in comparison to some of the other colors, but when I think of Green Earth, which I really love Green Earth, this is actually the most easy to use Green Earth I have ever used. It's definitely a kind of yellowish warm green earth. It's got a lot of granulation. It is easy to lift. It's definitely semi-opaque. Doesn't have a high dispersion. And even in the mass tone, it doesn't get super duper dark, but it gets darker than I think basically any other green earth I've ever used. And you can layer it quite well. And I'll just let you see me actually doing the lifting test so you can see how well they lift. And here they are dry. Aren't they pretty? So I think a lot of people's first thought when looking at this kind of palette is that it's for landscapes or it's just for skin tones, but it seems like it would be pretty versatile for me. So I took it out to a cafe and did a little sketching while I was there. And I think I was able to give you a pretty good look at what the cafe looks like. It's pretty versatile. Since it has the blue and the green and the yellow and the red, you can do everything. What do you think? One of the things that inspired Kirsten to make this line was that she couldn't find colors that could go deep enough and have a good enough range of tinting strength to satisfy her in conventional watercolors. So she decided to make her own that had much higher tinting strength than the other ones that you can find. So I decided to do some mixing charts that also shows them diluted and in full strength. First starting with a mixture of Cypress jarosite and Cypress Green Earth. So just to explain this chart, the top row is the undiluted first color and then watered down once and then watered down a second time as you go to the right. And the bottom row is the undiluted second color, in this case the Cypress Green Earth, and the same thing watered down as you go down to the right, and in between those two rows is the mixture. So the Cypress jarosite and the Cypress Green Earth are two of the lowest tinting strength pigments in this set, and you can see that overall, even in the completely undiluted swatches, the colors are quite light. But the colors definitely do maintain their strength even when diluted. You can get quite dilute and still have color and not become chalky or anything like that. You get a range of sort of khaki colors with these two. Then the next is the Colonial Raw Next is the Colonial Raw Umber and the Prussian Blue. You can see the Colonial Raw Umber on its own is quite dark, and the Prussian Blue is almost black. And when you mix them together, you start getting a range of browns that go into cool grays and diluted blues. It may look quite dilute in the middle part here, but that's because I really needed to water down the Prussian Blue in order for you to be able to see any of the color because it is quite so strong. That's why to the next of it, I did a continuous mixing spectrum so that you can see how quickly the colors go quite dark from the Colonial Raw Umber. You even get some kinds of greens, some really mossy, deep pine and cedar sort of greens. You get some browns, you get cooler reds, you get a wide range of colors just mixing these two. And as you can see, when you dilute them down, you still get a nice color. Actually, the Prussian Blue, when you dilute it one step, looks like a lot of other brands' regular Prussian Blue. Next is Colonial Yellow Ochre and Colonial Red. I kind of wanted to see what kind of different skin tones I could make. That's why I have these, and then I'm going to add Prussian Blues to get deeper skin tones. So starting out, this is a really beautiful range of peachy colors. You got these nice warm yellow ochres. Like I said, I love this yellow ochre. It is very clean and bright and sunny. And when you mix it with the Colonial Red, which has to be diluted a lot because as you can see, even diluted down 3 steps, it's packing a punch. And you get just a beautiful range of peachy tones. And when you see the spectrum chart that I do on the side, once you add Prussian Blue to it, you get to start getting these really deep browns, even almost blackish brown in the end. So that's just from 3 colors. Let alone if you start not with Colonial Yellow Ochre, but with Colonial Raw Umber, you'll get even warmer, deeper browns. So skin tones are definitely something that this palette excels at. I just wanted you to see everything up close after it's dried. Now this is a much more normal part of my review, the mixing chart and the color wheel. I wanted you to see all the colors that you can get with this set, since this is almost the entire line in the Hushwing collection. So there's not very much difference between the Cypress jarosite and the Colonial Yellow Ochre. They're both yellowish colors. The Cypress jarosite line is just a bit cooler than the yellow ochre. Then when you get to the Raw Sienna, you're starting to get darker and you're also starting to get a bit more granulation. Some of these swatches, like I said, I had to water down because it's impossible for you to see what the color is if I leave it as dark as it is in the mass tone. In the Burnt Sienna line, I really love how it mixed with the Colonial Violet. It became an even more interesting granulating, separating color. When you mix it with the Raw Umber, you get a much warmer, nicer brown. And when you mix it with the Prussian Blue, you get a quite sepia-like color. The Colonial Red mixes an absolutely perfect pitch black with the Prussian Blue. I actually don't think I can make a blacker black on my palette. So if you want soul-sucking black, this is an amazing combination. The Colonial Burnt Umber with the Prussian Blue makes this really nice gray, which is fun to work with. I also like how it looks with the Colonial Violet. The Colonial Violet and the Colonial Raw Umber create a strange color. I don't really know what to call it, but I could see this in sort of sandstone or once again some kind of animal scales, and it makes a deeper, inkier blue with the Prussian Blue. Funnily enough, the Colonial Raw Umber makes a green with the Prussian Blue, I guess because it is quite yellowy, and that's a sort of, once again, foresty, piney green. The line that you see with the least amount of tinting strength is going to be this Cypress green earth, but it has a lot of granulation and doesn't completely change the hue of the colors that it's mixed with, so it's a curious thing that you can do to make more texture. And on the side, I have swatched some colors that I think are particularly interesting. Next is the color wheel. I'm using Colonial Red, Prussian Blue, and Colonial Yellow Ochre. Like I said before, that yellow ochre is just a really nice, clear yellow. When you mix it with the Colonial Red, you get a range of orangey peaches. Then you have the Colonial Red, which is quite red, and the Prussian Blue, which is obviously a quite strong blue. When you mix those two together, though, you don't really get a purple. Well, you could color it a purple, but it would be the most desaturated purple that I've ever seen. It's a quite deep brown, so actually about 3/4 of this color wheel basically end up making things that are completely usable for skin tones. Some of the really cool brown tones may be a bit extreme, but for extremely dark shadows, you can use those on darker skinned people. And sometimes it's hard to get a really nice, cool, dark brown without it just going kind of green or strange colored. The yellow ochre and the Prussian Blue make a nice range of soft, mutated greens. So I just wanted to do a comparison of these colors to some of the other colors on my palette. So first we're going to start with the Cypress Jarosite, the Colonial Yellow Ochre, and the Colonial Raw Sienna, since those colors are quite similar to one another. The Hushwing colors definitely stand on their own when faced with these other colors. It's definitely better than the Light Nice Raw Sienna, which I don't even use on my palette. The Schmincke Yellow Ochre is a quite muddy yellow ochre. The Dennis Smith Yellow Ochre is a lot warmer than the Colonial Yellow Ochre or the Cypress Jarosite, and it's a lot lighter than the Colonial Raw Sienna. Overall, I would say that these colors are actually quite different than the ones that you would find in other brands. You could say that probably if you mix the Colonial Yellow Ochre and the Colonial Raw Sienna, you would get something like the Core Yellow Ochre, the Dennis Smith Yellow Ochre, the Old Holland Raw Sienna Deep, and the Lost in Colors Golden Ochre. Lost in Colors is another handmade watercolor brand from Austria, which I will be doing a review of soon. So next, let's talk about the Colonial Burnt Sienna. A lot of people have a lot of feelings about burnt sienna. I'm not particularly bothered about burnt sienna. I don't actually have a proper burnt sienna on my palette. The colors I have on my palette instead of burnt sienna are Old Holland Golden Baroque Red and Old Holland Red Ochre, because those neutralize really well with Indanthrone Blue. So the Colonial Burnt Sienna is a lot less orangey. It's quite a lot more brownish and not as warm as a lot of the colors. The Core Burnt Sienna is probably the closest in hue, but the Colonial Burnt Sienna has a lot more granulation and these dark bits that drop out in the granulation, whereas these other colors are not quite as granulating. Also, the Old Holland Red Ochre is quite similar to the hue of it as well. The Colonial Red is definitely a type of Venetian red, but it's definitely more complex than any of the other Venetian reds that I have. The Schmincke Venetian Red actually appears darker than the swatch of the Colonial Red that I put here. The Colonial Red can definitely get deeper, but it's deeper than this swatch. And actually the hues are not that different, but the Colonial Red has a lot more granulation and a lot more different colors going on in it, whereas the Schmincke's, as usual, is a lot more even. The Lost in Colors Venetian Red is also similar. It's a bit redder, pinkier, whereas the Colonial Red is a lot more deeper, darker, stormier kind of red. The Colonial Burnt Umber is a bit warmer than the Dalerani Burnt Umber I have, so it's a bit more burnt. They're both quite granulating colors, so actually these two are quite close to one another, which was surprising. The Colonial Raw Umber is actually surprisingly close to the M-Gram Raw Umber. It's also, once again, a little warmer. It's a little yellower in the undertone. It has a bit more granulation than the M-Gram Raw Umber, but the M-Gram Raw Umber also has quite a lot of raw umber. I tried it next to the Schmincke Sepia because I thought this is also a very cool brown, but that one is a lot more neutral than these other two. So I have the Hushwing Prussian Blue and the Schmincke Prussian Blue. If that doesn't tell you the difference between these two, like, it's completely, immediately evident. I also have the Dalerani Prussian Blue, which has a much better showing than the Schmincke one, but it still is not quite as deep as the Hushwing Prussian Blue. Now I have the Colonial Green Earth, and I have a bunch of different green earth options. The hue is actually unique amongst all of the different green earth options that I have, which is surprising. The Rembrandt Green Earth is a lot bluer. Then I have 3 green earth colors from Lost in Colors: Bohemian Green Earth, Niçoise Green, and French Earth. I really love this Bohemian Green Earth, and it has quite good tinting strength. It is much yellower than the Colonial Green Earth. The Niçoise Green and the French Earth are quite difficult to get off of the pan in comparison to the Colonial Green Earth, which, once again, for an earth green color, it is so easy to get it and get quite dark, as you can see on the left-hand side where the paint is pooling. It gets very dark in comparison to the other green earths, which don't get very dark. They all have this same kind of, I don't even know if I would say granulating, but paint collecting blotchiness to them, which I actually like. Other people may not like it, but I would say at the moment this is definitely one of my favorite green earths ever. Alright, finally, we're gonna get to painting. I wanted to mix some colors together so that I can see which neutralize the best. Mixing different browns with the Prussian Blue. And I also just wanted to show you so you can see how these colors mix and flow on the paper. That's with Raw Sienna. That's with Burnt Umber. That's with the Burnt Sienna. In the end, I decided on the Colonial Violet and mixed that with the Prussian Blue to do this painting, which I tried a little different method. It's basically backwards, starting with the most darkest and concentrated parts of the painting, and then just adding water and lightening up the wash and putting that over the page in successive washes. It was really fun, and the reference is a painting that I took in Versailles of a bust there. While I'm painting, I just wanted to give you a couple of facts actually. So Kirsten Kuhner is the lady behind Hushwing Watercolors, and she is very nice, and she very generously sent me these paints to review for you guys. The company is based in Virginia, and it's been around for about a year now, so it's a quite young watercolor company. She really wanted to make high quality, artist grade handmade watercolor paints, and I really believe that she's achieved her goal in doing that. All of these colors are extremely easy to re-wet. Some of the colors have lower tinting strength, like I said, like the yellows and the green, but the other ones have very high tinting strength, like very high, especially the Prussian Blue and the Venetian Red. all of the colors have a lot of color shift. Not necessarily that they get duller or lighter, but they don't exactly appear the way that they seem wet when they are dry. I think that's because the pigments, the heavier ones that I'm talking about that gives it this kind of two-tone duality, they settle out and you can't see that when it's wet. So for example, my favorite color, the Colonial Violet, really doesn't look like itself when it's wet. I just have to know and trust and believe that it will be itself when it dries out. That sounds really weird. For this set, it is $115 plus shipping. So as much as I really love these colors, I know that $11.50 a pan is a lot for a lot of people. That is much more expensive than the majority of conventional watercolor paints. But Kirsten definitely tries to give you the luxury feel, and she definitely gives you amazing quality paints for your money. Now, does that mean that you need to go out and get these paints despite the cost? There's almost no paints that I could say that you have to run out and get them despite the cost. Almost any of the artist grade brands are going to do well for you, so if you have those, definitely use those. Now, if you are really into granulation, gentle granulation, not particularly granulation like Daniel Smith, this is a different kind of granulation in it. I don't even know if I would say that they're gentle. I would just say that it's totally different than the granulation that I have seen in any other kind of paints, and I like it. So if you're into that, and you're really into earth colors, and or you want a Prussian blue that's going to punch you in the face, these paints are definitely amazing. I also love, I can't believe that I haven't told this to you yet, all of the paints that are called Colonial plus the color name. These are actually colors that are taken from American soil. These are American handmade paints made in America from American soil. And I think that's really cool and different. The only ones that are not from American soil, obviously the Prussian Blue and the two Cypress colors, Cypress Jarosite and Cypress Green Earth. I decided to do two different paintings, by the way. I did the bust because I wanted to do a different technique and show you that you don't just have to paint everything brown with this palette, because I think that's what some people will think when they see it. You can definitely do some really cool neutralizing sketches just from two different colors. But of course I had to do something brown, and I just really thought that the texture of these paints was so buttery and smooth that I wanted to paint a croissant. And let me tell you, the entire time I was painting it, I was so hungry. I really, really wanted a croissant. And I can get croissants in Germany, but croissants in Germany are not like croissants in France. That level of butter is something that I miss. So you can see just how gently and beautifully and softly they disperse in wet and wet applications. And I did a lot of layers on this painting, and they were definitely able to stand up to that with no problem. At some point in time, I actually did a bunch of detail, and then I did a wash over that. And some of the detail went away, but some of it stayed. So this is pretty good considering that these are earth colors, and earth colors are normally extremely lifting. I loved the way that these colors mingled together. They were very easy to mix. They just added a bunch of texture and granulation to this croissant that I didn't even have to struggle with. It was really just a pleasure painting this, except for the fact, like I said, that I was extremely hungry the entire time. But that's not Christian's fault, that's my fault. So I think this set definitely has my favorite Prussian Blue, one of my favorite green earths, and my favorite Venetian red, and of course, I guess my favorite violet earth color because I have no other violet earth color, and I think that this is absolutely gorgeous. I love the other colors as well, especially the Colonial Raw Umber. There are a few different sets in the Hushwing lineup. There is the Hushwing collection, which is this collection of 10 colors. There is the Cypress collection, which includes the Cypress jarosite and the Cypress green earth. There is another collection with the Prussian Blue and the Colonial Raw Sienna. There's the Colonial palette, which has all of the colonial colors, which are all of the browns. And there's the modern palette, which has the Prussian Blue, including 2 other synthetic pigments, a red and a yellow, which makes up a primary triad. To be honest, if I had started in Hushwing with the Cypress palette, I feel like I would be a little bit disappointed because those are, as I've said before, the 2 pigments with the least amount of tinting strength. When you saw me do the mixing chart and tinting chart with 2 colors, that was the very first range that I did, and it has definitely some beautiful colors and unique range, but I think it's not as useful and as impressive as some of the other palettes. The palette with the Prussian Blue and the Colonial Raw Umber is definitely your best bang for your buck because you get to tiptoe into Hushwing with only 2 colors, but it gives you a wide range that you can work with. You get a range of peaches that you can get from just tinting down the raw umber. You can get a range of browns, you get into grays, you get into greens, you get into blues just from 2 colors. That's pretty amazing. This is the sort of thing that you can always have in your pocket, and you can take out urban sketching or plain air painting or whatever and do tons of stuff with it as long as you're willing to play with tinting and mixing. And then the Colonial palette is exclusively, like I said, the browns. So that makes it not quite as versatile as the entire Hushwing collection, because the Hushwing collection, for me, what makes it one of the other really versatile palettes in the Hushwing line is the fact that it does have that blue and the green, particularly the fact that it has the blue. Because then with the yellow ochre, the Venetian red, and the Prussian Blue, you have a triad. And once you have a triad, you can do anything, guys. So I'm really glad that I got to try out the entire Hushwing collection because that allowed me to see what sort of combinations you would do with most of the different palettes in the line. The only one that I wish I could have tried out was the modern palette, but if the other modern pigments that Christian makes are as pigment loaded as the Prussian Blue, it is definitely going to be a stellar palette, but I can't say for sure because I haven't tried it out myself. I really loved trying these out. They really show that handmade paints don't have to be gritty or low tinting or substandard just because they're handmade. These are definitely high quality paints. Is there any specific color that you really like? Do you have any questions about the Hushwing line? Is there a handmade watercolor line that you really love? Let me know all about it in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was useful. Thank you so much for my Patreons. There seems to be a lot more activity happening over there, and I'm really excited. I'm actually going to be filming a video exclusively for my Patreons very soon. So if you want to see that, you have to check it out. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Hope you had fun. I had a lot of fun. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Talk to you next time. Bye.